During the campaign, I committed to finding 4 cents on every dollar that we spend.
Balancing the budget is a critical first step to protecting our core services.
We have to find small efficiencies across the board. It's not sustainable.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford campaigned on a promise to find $6 billion of efficiencies in Ontario's budget, pledging that no one would lose their jobs in the meantime. When his government delivered its budget this spring, they laid out a plan to get back to balance by 2023. In the weeks since that budget, there has been outcry and protests across the province as more details of cuts were announced on a range of programs. The CBC's Queen's Park reporter Mike Crawley joins us now for a deep dive, let's call it, on some of the key cuts. Hey, Mike, great to see you. So we know that we've been learning about these cuts kind of drip by drip by drip over the past few months, ever since the budget was actually introduced. Let's go through some of the key areas that are seeing those cuts, though, beginning with education.
So this one's controversial because there have literally been hundreds of teachers who've been given layoff notices across Ontario. So the government has a target over the coming years of nearly 3,500 teaching positions that they want to eliminate. The biggest impact is in the high schools. The class size average in Ontario's secondary schools is going to go up by about 25%. And the government, although it looks on the bottom line that they're spending more on education, when you consider the fact that there's enrollment growth, they're actually spending less per pupil. It's down by a little over $50 per student.
They have insisted that those 3,500 jobs are by attrition. But what we've heard from school boards is that, no, they're actually having to cut jobs.
Oh, so the layoff notices have been issued, and the government says there's a fund to allow them to protect some jobs if they don't have enough teachers leave the profession or retire to replace them. So we're really only going to get a sense of that come September when school resumes.
Okay, what about healthcare or public health cuts specifically? We saw 10 former health ministers sign a letter complaining about those cuts. Tell us a bit about those, what's happening there.
Yeah, public health, $200 million is the plan for cutting within the public health sector. And that's important because the public health is actually administered by the municipalities. So they're the ones who are feeling the pinch in particular. A lot of the healthcare spending cuts, though, we're not going to be able to see yet because the government's doing this big reorganization of the healthcare bureaucracy in Ontario. And they say that they're going to be able to save money by reducing duplication and things. But we've already seen some cuts in funding to certain areas. So the government's health policy and research programs being reduced by a little over $50 million. eHealth Ontario, which is supposed to bring technology to the healthcare system, its budget is being cut by 20%. Those are just a couple of examples.
What about mayors? Those are some of the more vocal critics of these cuts, even everything from education to public health. Here's a sample of what one mayor had to say.
Day after day, night after night, weekend after weekend, more letters and envelopes and emails and smoke signals come out of there saying that there's cuts to everything.
So what are some of the concerns coming from municipalities, Mike?
Well, one of the biggest concerns is that municipalities set their budgets back at the beginning of the year. They work on a calendar year system, so they feel that they're blindsided that the government is now all of a sudden expecting them to change their budgets midway through their own fiscal year. The target that the government has set for municipalities is to try to find 4% of savings on every dollar, which doesn't actually sound like all that much, but the municipalities are insisting they're running pretty lean operations and that this would have to eat into some of their key services that they offer, like policing, which is one of the most expensive things that municipalities do. The City of Toronto has added up the figures, and they say that the funding cut and a reduction in planned revenue that they were going to get from the government is nearly $180 million.
Wow. Okay. I know the government contends that the budget in Toronto specifically, the fight seems to be pretty big between Toronto and the province in that they're saying, oh, the budget has become inflated under John Tory, which he obviously disputes. Anyway, moving on to other cuts, because those are some of the bigger areas, but there are a lot of smaller, more incremental cuts elsewhere. Can you go over some of those?
Yeah, so these are the things that we only really found out about, for instance, when the estimates were published, which was the very nitty-gritty line-by-line stuff. There was a program to plant 50 million trees across the province. That was cut. An interlibrary loan service that brought books between libraries in rural areas. Their funding was cut in half. Stem cell research. There was a big cut in funding to artificial intelligence research. So as we've been hearing about these things, it's been a bit of a kind of political death by 1,000 cuts, because the government is trying to spread things out, find these efficiencies in various places, but what it seems to be doing a bit is making them enemies in a bunch of different places. And
they have been insisting that they've been contradicting or drawing opposition to the terminologies. They say this isn't, they aren't cutting, they're actually spending more on health and education. Here's one Conservative MPP, Stephen Lecce, on our show earlier this week saying exactly that.
In virtually every single area, from long-term care for our seniors to mental health for our most vulnerable, to those who are trying to get quality health care without having to have the indignity of being in a hallway. We are adding money every step of the way. In education, $700 million more money increased and spent this year.
So help us understand that. Is the government spending more on those programs?
Well, if you look at the bottom line, yes, but factor in inflation, factor in population growth, and what they're spending per person is actually decreasing. And you don't have to take my word for it. The Financial Accountability Officer, the Ontario equivalent of the Parliamentary Budget Officer, looked at the numbers, and they're forecasting that actually what you're going to see is a 10% cut in per person spending, because Ontario already, among the provinces, has the lowest per capita spending on provincial government services.
And just before I let you go, we're a few weeks out now from the one-year anniversary of this government. Talk a bit about your impressions on whether or not this has had a political impact for them. What kind of reaction have Ontarians had to the budget, and what's happened since?
Yeah, I don't get the sense that it's eating away at kind of that core Conservative support, but there have been 3 polls in a row, Vashi, that have indicated that the PCs have shrunk in their overall support down to about the 30% mark from around 40% that they got in the last election. So that would kind of indicate that some of those swing voters that came to the PCs to kick out Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals are feeling that they're not so pleased with what's going on. Remember, these guys campaigned on a promise to balance the budget through efficiencies, right? But those efficiencies are turning into actual spending cuts, and maybe it's maybe there's less waste going on within this provincial government than the PCs seem to indicate, at least during the campaign.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thank you, Mike. That's the CBC's Mike Crawley in Toronto. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.